Before the story begins tonight, a small word about why we are here. History is full of noise, battles, kings, dates to memorize. But that is not what we look for here. We come instead for its quiet corners, the small human moments that have gone on, softly, in every century, the same as they go on in you tonight. These stories are chosen slowly and read slowly, for one reason only: to keep you gentle company as you fall asleep. So let the day go now. There is nothing to remember and nothing to hold. Just a little history, told kindly, to carry you down into sleep. Welcome. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. There's nothing left for you to do now. No task waiting. No message that can't keep until morning. You've arrived at the quiet end of the day, and the only thing left is to let yourself grow heavy and still. So settle in. Loosen your shoulders. Let the pillow take the full weight of your head, and let your breathing slow to its own soft, unhurried rhythm. If you feel like it, and only if it feels easy, you might gently tap the like button, or leave the subscribe as a small marker so we can drift off together again another night. And if your eyes are still open, you could tell me in the comments where in the world you're resting tonight, and what the hour is where you are. I always find it soothing to imagine all of us scattered across so many dark and sleeping rooms, each of us letting the same quiet story carry us down. But none of that matters now. It can wait. Nothing here asks anything of you. Go ahead and dim the light a little more, if there's any left to dim. Perhaps turn on a fan, or let some soft, low hum fill the edges of the room. The kind of sound that smooths the silence over like a blanket. And when you're ready, let your eyes close and simply listen. My voice will stay here, low and even, for as long as you need it. There's no need to follow every word. You can let them blur and wander and slip away from you entirely. That's exactly how it's meant to be. Tonight we're going to drift back a very long way, back through the centuries, through the fields and forests of a world lit only by fire, to the small, quiet lives of medieval peasants, and to the long, cold winters they learned to survive. When we picture those far-off days, we tend to imagine bright banners and jousting knights, grand feasts in torch-lit halls, the noise and color of a fair. But for the ordinary person, the one who woke before dawn and worked the frozen earth, winter was something much simpler and much closer to the bone. It was, above all, a season to be endured, a long, dark stretch of the year that returned as faithfully as the harvest, asking only one thing of them: to make it through to spring. Let yourself picture it, slowly, in no hurry at all. A small dwelling of mud and woven sticks, standing alone at the edge of a sleeping village, walls so thin that the wind outside seems to breathe right through them. No glass in the windows, only a narrow gap stuffed with hide to keep the worst of the weather out. Inside, the air is dim and close, and the warmth of the place rises and falls with nothing more than the weather beyond the walls. When the frost gathered outside, the cold settled inside too, only a little softer, a little kinder, held back by whatever small comforts the family could gather around themselves. And the nights were the longest part of it all. The sun would fall away early, and the darkness would come in thick and complete, the way darkness does when there are no streetlights, no distant glow on the horizon, nothing but the stars and the small red heart of a fire. The wind would move across the fields and lean against the little house, and the flames in the hearth would flicker and sink, doing their patient, faithful best against the cold. This is where our story begins tonight. In the deep quiet of a winter's night, long ago, among people who knew how to be still, how to wait, and how to keep warmth close through the darkest hours. So stay with me here, in that hush. There's nothing to solve and nowhere to be, just the slow turning of a long winter night, and a story to carry you gently down into sleep. And so the bed itself was rarely more than a wooden frame, if a family was fortunate enough to own one, filled with a great sack of straw, or hay, or old dried rushes gathered from the water's edge. That was all. No soft layers, No gentle give beneath you, only the quiet rustle of dried stalks settling under your weight as you shifted in the dark. Some households didn't have even the frame, and simply spread the straw across the packed earth of the floor, lying close to the ground where the family had always slept. It sounds humble, and it was, but there was a kind of steadiness in it, the same bed of straw beneath the same roof, night after night, season after season. Straw like that never lasted. In time it flattened and grew soft with damp, and so a few times each year it would be gathered up and carried out, and fresh straw brought in to take its place. On the freshest nights it might be scattered with a little lavender or rosemary, sweet herbs to lay over the plainer smells of the household and the animals. And for a night or two the whole room would carry that faint green scent as everyone drifted off. Let that image stay with you a moment. A dim room, a floor of fresh rushes, the last of the herbs still faintly in the air, and the whole family sinking down into the straw as the light fails. For all its plainness, that bedding did something quietly vital. Piled thick, the straw held a pocket of stillness between the sleeper and the cold ground below. And when bodies gathered close upon it, their warmth gathered too, held in and shared between them through the long hours. It was warmth made of very little, gathered patiently and kept close, and it carried them from dusk until the pale beginning of morning. The house around them was patched and mended against the same cold. Where the wind found a gap in the wall, they filled it, softly and without hurry, pressing in moss or dry grass, or a twist of old cloth, or a little tuft of animal hair, anything soft enough to close the opening and still the draught. Some would spread a fresh layer of mud over the outer walls before the deep of winter set in, sealing the little house against the weather one smooth handful at a time. And where the thatch above had thinned, they tucked in fresh reeds or a piece of turf, until the roof held together again, weathered and patched and faithfully keeping the night out. Every winter the house was made whole again this way, gap by gap, until it could hold its small warmth safe inside. Through the darkest of those nights, the fire could not be left to fend for itself, and so the household learned to rest in turns, while some lay down beneath the blankets and the hay to gather what sleep they could. Another would stay near the hearth, watching over the embers, feeding the flame, keeping the warmth alive for everyone. After a few hours they would trade, one rising softly to take up the watch, another settling down into the warm hollow the first had left behind. There was a gentleness buried in that arrangement, a quiet promise passed from hand to hand through the night, that someone was always awake and tending the light, so that no one would wake to a cold and lifeless hearth. The embers survived because they were never truly left alone, and so the family survived with them. Even the way they breathed grew slow and careful in the cold. Rather than draw great gulps of the frozen air, they learned to breathe softly, gently, quietly through the nose, letting each breath warm just a little before it reached them. Some drew a fold of cloak or a corner of cloth up over the mouth as they slept, a soft veil against the chill, so that the night's air arrived already gentled and warmed. There is something almost restful in that idea, and you might even let your own breathing follow it now. Slow, quiet, easy, in through the nose, unhurried, and out again just as softly, each breath a little calmer than the one before. And they went to sleep full, whenever they could. A heavy meal before bed was its own kind of warmth, for the body works quietly through the night to take it in, and that quiet work gives off a low and lasting heat. So on the coldest evenings they would gather around a thick stew, dark with turnips and onions and parsnips, or a bowl of oat porridge, or barley, or dense chewy rye bread, whatever the season had left them. It was plain food, warm and heavy and filling, made to settle deep and burn slow, carrying its warmth through the long hours until morning. And with a full belly and a steady breath, sleep came a little more easily against the cold. They found other small warmths too, clever and homely. A wooden box lined thickly with hay, could hold the heat of a cooked meal for hours, so that a pot of stew set inside at dusk was still warm long after the fire had died down. And the same simple wisdom warmed their beds, a smooth, flat stone set near the fire until it held a deep and gentle heat, would be lifted out and wrapped carefully in rags, then tucked down at the foot of the bed or slipped beneath the straw. All through the night it would give its warmth back, slowly, quietly, a small, steady heat resting against cold feet in the dark. Little comforts, all of them, gathered from stone and hay and patience, but on a hard winter's night a little comfort was a great deal. Nearest to the fire slept those who needed it most. The smallest children, the eldest of the family, anyone frail or unwell, were given the warmest places closest to the glow, while the sturdier ones settled a little further out, forming soft rings of warmth around the ones they wished to protect. It was a quiet kindness worked out without any words, night after night, the strong sheltering the tender, everyone drawing in toward the same small light, and there, lulled by the low pop and hiss of the burning wood, breath rising faintly in the cool air beyond the fire's reach, they let themselves drift down into sleep. No one faced that cold entirely alone. The whole village leaned together against the winter. If a neighbor's fire went dark, someone noticed, and someone came, carrying a glowing coal wrapped in rags to wake the cold hearth back to life, or opening their own crowded door to take a chilled family in for the night. There were watchers, the very young and the very old, who kept a gentle eye on who had not been seen in a while, whose chimney had gone quiet, who might need a little help getting through. In the hardest seasons the village would share what little it had. A few common meals of salted meat and grain, enough to carry everyone a bit further toward the thaw. Whatever small quarrels ran between neighbors in the easier months were quietly set aside when the night turned deadly, for each of them knew that tomorrow the one needing help might just as easily be themselves. And when they had done all they could, when the fire was banked and the gaps were sealed and the family lay close together in the straw, they would offer up their quiet hopes into the dark, a few soft words before sleep, asking only for the fire to hold, the roof to keep, the morning to come. A candle might be left gently burning through the night, a small steady flame set against the darkness, and by its light they would let their eyes close. Simple hopes, whispered up into the smoky rafters and tucked in beneath the blankets alongside them, carrying them through one more of winter's long, quiet nights. Not every winter was kind, and they knew it. There were years the cold pressed harder than any fire could answer, when the frost lay heavy and long over the little villages and much was lost beneath it. History remembers some of those hard seasons still, distant now, softened by all the centuries between, but you need not follow them there tonight. Let those far-off winters rest where they lie, quiet and long ago, and stay here instead in the warm and gathered dark, among the straw and the low embers and the sleeping family, where the fire still holds and the night is being kept safe for you. There is nothing left to tend, nothing left to watch for, only the soft settling of the straw, the faint warmth of the stone, and the slow, easy rhythm of your own quiet breathing, carrying you gently onward into sleep. And when the very worst of the cold came, all their cleverness and care could not always be enough. Some winters simply asked more than a body could give. Sickness moved easily through the smoke and the damp and the hunger, and a chill that settled in the chest in the deep of the year did not always lift again. Frost, too, could take its quiet toll, leaving its mark on fingers and toes and the tips of ears, so that some carried the memory of a hard winter in their own hands for the rest of their days. And what is strangest to us now, looking back across all those centuries, is how gently they came to accept it. They knew that each winter some among them might not see the spring, and they did not rage against it so much as make room for it, the way you make room for a familiar face at the door. Loss was simply part of the turning of the year, folded quietly into everything else. And yet, knowing all of that, they still pressed on, They still banked the fire each night and rose to tend it, still sealed the walls and shared the bread, and whispered their small hopes into the dark. As long as a single ember still glowed in the hearth, as long as there was one more breath rising into the cold air, there was still a reason to hold on until morning. That was their quiet, stubborn strength, and it is worth pausing on for a moment as you lie there warm and safe. Everything's soft around you now. Every comfort you have half forgotten to notice rests on the endurance of countless ordinary people who learned to carry warmth through the longest nights, one ember, one breath, one heartbeat at a time. There is something restful in that thought. You are the far, warm end of a very long story of people keeping each other safe through the dark. And tonight, the keeping of it is not your task. You can simply rest inside it. So let that world settle now, and drift softly with me into another one, far from the cold fields and the little huts of straw, into the grand and candlelit halls of long-ago England, and the story of a woman named Anne Boleyn. She did not begin life as anyone the world expected to remember. Born around the turn of the 16th century, the daughter of an ambitious diplomat and a noblewoman of good family, her arrival stirred barely a ripple in the wide sweep of her age. But even as a girl she was marked out, not by wealth, but by a quick and shining mind. She was clever, spirited, and by every account impossible to look away from. And so her family sent her abroad, out into the glittering courts of the continent, to learn the things a bright young woman could learn there. Picture those years unfolding slowly and easily, the way a good story should before sleep. First, the elegant court of the Netherlands, where she served a great lady and quietly absorbed the arts of grace and diplomacy. Then the courts of France, where she spent long years among queens and learned the soft language of influence, the turn of wit, the way to hold a room without ever seeming to reach for it. While others practiced their needlework, she practiced conversation and understanding, and the subtle music of a well-chosen word. By the time she came home to England again, she carried the polish of Europe and a purpose all her own, though it was still folded away, unseen, beneath her courtly manners. She was not thought a great beauty, even by those who admired her most, but she was arresting all the same. Dark eyes lit with intelligence, a quick and musical voice, a way of moving that hinted at some quiet intention just beneath the surface. When she entered a room, something in it seemed to shift and gather toward her, and soon enough, that gathering drew the attention of the king himself, Henry VIII. Here the story slows into a long and careful dance, the kind that plays out over years. Henry was a man well used to being adored, used to hearts offered up the moment he glanced their way. But Anne did not fall the way others had. She was warm and then distant, near and then just out of reach, and the more she held herself apart, the deeper the king's fascination ran. Letters passed between them, full of longing and frustration and hope, and when at last he offered her the comfortable, well-worn role that other women had accepted before her, she quietly, astonishingly, said no. She would not be a passing favorite, soon admired and sooner forgotten. If the king wished to have her, it would have to be as his wife and his queen. It was an extraordinary thing to ask, and it set in motion years of upheaval that reached far beyond the two of them. For the king was already married to Catherine of Aragon, a dignified and steadfast queen beloved by the people, and to free himself he would have to move against the great powers of his day, and against the settled traditions of centuries. Slowly, stubbornly, over the course of nearly 7 years, he did just that, remaking the very structure of the realm so that Anne might wear the crown. The court divided into quiet factions, some drifting toward the rising star, others holding fast to the old queen, and letters flew across Europe as kingdoms watched to see how it would end. And in time, it ended as Anne had gambled it would. In the first month of the year, she and Henry were quietly married, and by the summer she was crowned queen in a great ceremony, anointed with the sacred oil usually kept for kings alone. It should have been the brightest moment of her life, and in many ways it was. though the crowds who watched her pass were uncertain, some cheering, some still murmuring soft prayers for the queen who had come before. Anne entered her new place not as a gentle, familiar figure, but as something bright and new and a little unsettling, dazzling the court with her intelligence, reshaping it in her own image, lifting her family higher than they had ever stood. Yet a queen's fortunes in that world rested on a single heavy hope, the birth of a son. And when Anne's first child came, it was a daughter, a bright and healthy girl named Elizabeth, a child who would one day grow into something the age could not yet imagine. Anne met her disappointment with grace, certain that a son would follow. But the years that came after were harder than the years before. The hoped-for heir did not arrive, and sorrow gathered where there had once been triumph. The king who had once moved the whole kingdom for her began, little by little, to turn his gaze away, toward a quieter, softer presence at the edges of the court and around Anne. Old rivals who had waited long and patiently began at last to stir. The story of how it drew to its close is a sad and quiet one, and you need not carry the weight of it too closely tonight. The charges brought against her were strange and tangled and almost certainly untrue, stitched together by those who found it easier to be rid of her than to keep her. And though she answered them with all the composure and sharp clarity that had once won a king, the ending had been decided before ever she spoke. In the spring, she was taken to the Tower of London, no longer a queen commanding a court, but a prisoner, awaiting whatever would come. And here, in these last hushed days, something in her steadied rather than broke. She spent long hours in prayer on the cold stone floor, her voice calm, her spirit oddly at peace. She comforted the few loyal women who wept for her, turning their grief gently aside, even finding a thread of wry, quiet humor in her own fate. She asked forgiveness for those who had wronged her, and prayed above all for peace in the kingdom and for mercy toward her little daughter. When at last she was told the hour had come, she met the news without collapsing into fear. She dressed with care in the soft grey light of that final morning, gathered up her dark hair beneath a simple cap, and prepared to face the end with the same grace she had carried all her life. And there, as the cold morning mist curled low across the old stones of the courtyard, we can let the story rest a while, and let her stand quiet in that pale light. There is no need to follow any further tonight. The rooms of that far-off court are dim now, the voices low and almost gone, and all of it lies centuries and centuries behind you, softened by time into little more than a story told in the dark. You are here, and warm, and wholly safe, wrapped in comforts those long-ago lives could scarcely have dreamed of. So let your thoughts drift loose from queens and kings and cold stone halls, and settle back into the slow, easy rhythm of your own breathing, and let it carry you gently down, deeper and softer, into sleep. And so she stepped forward, quiet and composed, in the pale light of that spring morning. A small gathering had come to the courtyard within the tower, and a great hush lay over all of it, as though even the old stone walls were holding their breath. Anne stood tall, thinner than she had once been, her face calm, her grey gown stirring faintly in the cool air. There were no tears, no pleading, only a strange and steady grace. She spoke only briefly and gently, choosing her last words with care. She did not accuse anyone, and she did not defend herself. She simply asked for blessings upon the king and prayed for the good of the realm, offering, at the very end, not bitterness but forgiveness. Then she knelt, her hands folded, her eyes lifted, and let her thoughts turn quietly toward heaven. And in a single, swift, silent moment, it was over, and Anne Boleyn passed out of her troubled world and into the long quiet of history. She was laid to rest without ceremony, in an unmarked place within the tower grounds, a queen who had once been crowned in gold slipping away almost unnoticed. And yet her story did not truly end in that quiet grave, for the little daughter whose birth had once disappointed a king would grow, in time, into Elizabeth, one of the greatest rulers England would ever know, carrying forward her mother's quick mind and unyielding spirit into a long and golden reign. In that way, Anne outlasted the crown she had worn so briefly, remembered not for how she was lost, but for how deeply she had changed the shape of things. Let her rest there, softly, in the far distance of the past, and let your thoughts drift on, easy and unhurried, toward another time and another shore. For our story now crosses a wide ocean and moves forward by more than 2 centuries to the American colonies in the years around 1770. Picture a land stretched thin with quiet frustration, still bound to Britain, the country many still thought of as a kind of mother across the sea, yet growing slowly weary beneath her rule. It had not begun with any single great event, but gathered gradually, the way clouds gather on a far horizon. There had been taxes, passed by a distant parliament in which the colonists had no voice, small levies on paper and glass and everyday things, each one landing softly at first, and yet leaving behind a deepening sense of unfairness. At first the colonists answered only with words, and there is something almost peaceful in imagining it. All those carefully written petitions and thoughtful pamphlets, the long reasoned arguments about liberty and rights filling the newspapers. Merchants quietly agreed among themselves not to buy British goods. Writers set down their case in patient, deliberate prose. Many still hoped, sincerely, that if they simply explained themselves clearly enough, the distant government would listen and the quarrel would fade. And now and then a tax was lifted, and hope would rise again, only to settle back as some new measure took its place. For it was never truly about the money, which was modest enough. It was about the principle of it, the wish to be treated as partners rather than distant possessions, and that was a harder thing to soothe. The city of Boston, more than any other, became the quiet center of all this feeling, and in time the whole long disagreement came to rest. Of all things, upon something as gentle and familiar as tea, a new law had allowed a great trading company to sell its tea to the colonies cheaply, more cheaply than ever before, and on the surface it seemed almost a kindness, but the old tax still lingered quietly within it. And to accept the bargain was, in a way, to accept the principle the colonists had set themselves against. And so softly and firmly, all along the coast, the tea was turned away. Ship after ship sent back from harbour after harbour without ever unloading its cargo. In Boston, though, 3 ships lay anchored in the cold winter harbour and would not leave, held there by officials who insisted the tea must come ashore, and by colonists equally determined that it never would. For nearly 3 weeks they sat, quiet and waiting, while the town gathered in its meeting houses, thousands of people crowding into the largest halls, their breath fogging the cold air, talking long into the evenings about what might be done. A deadline drew steadily nearer, the day by which the tea, by law, would have to be landed, and everyone understood that once it was, the principle would quietly be lost. And so, on a grey and cold December evening, when the last hope of sending the ships away had faded, the town made its answer. It was not a wild or violent thing. It was, if anything, remarkably calm, and carried out with a strange and careful discipline. A group of men slipped through the darkening streets toward the wharf, their faces darkened with soot, wrapped in rough blankets, not truly hoping to disguise who they were so much as to mark that they were doing something new. Quietly they went aboard the 3 waiting ships. No one was harmed. The crews stood aside and watched, and one by one, chest after chest, the men lifted out the tea and broke it open and let it fall into the dark water of the harbour, until thousands of pounds of it floated out across the cold tide. There was no looting, no shouting, no chaos. In a town that knew real hardship, not a single thing of value was taken, only the tea, the one thing that had come to stand for the whole long quarrel. And when the work was done, the men simply melted away into the back streets and alleys and were gone, leaving the harbour swirling quietly under the winter sky. The next morning the town woke to the salt and tea smell hanging in the air, and the news spread gently outward from there, carried by letters and printed sheets, and word passed from door to door, out across the colonies, and in time, all the long way back across the ocean to London. What followed unfolded slowly, the way these things do. The distant government, offended, answered with stern new laws meant to punish the one city and to warn all the others, closing the harbour, tightening its grip. But the effect was not at all what had been intended. Rather than frightening the other colonies into quiet, the sight of Boston's shuttered port and silent docks stirred a deep and unexpected sympathy. Wagons of food and supplies began to make their way in from neighboring colonies, along with letters of support and quiet pledges of unity. What had been one city's trouble was becoming, gently and steadily, something shared among them all. And so, the following autumn, representatives from nearly all the colonies gathered together for the first time in Philadelphia, sitting down under one roof to speak with a single voice. Most of them still hoped, even then, for reconciliation, for a return to the older, easier bond. But beneath their careful words, a quiet understanding had taken root, that they could no longer stand apart from one another, that they were beginning, almost without noticing, to think of themselves not as scattered and separate provinces, but as one people. The great changes that would follow still lay ahead of them, far off and unhurried, gathering slowly like weather far out at sea. But you need not travel any further with them tonight. Let the meeting houses grow quiet, and the winter harbour lie still under the stars, and all those long ago voices soften and fade into the deep well of the past. It is all so very far away now, centuries behind you, gentle and distant, and asking nothing of you at all. There is only this quiet room, and the soft weight of your own stillness, and the slow and easy rhythm of your breathing, carrying you further and further down, into warmth, into quiet, into sleep. And in the end, the harsh laws meant to frighten the colonies into quiet did just the opposite. In trying to make an example of one city, the distant government had, without meaning to, given the colonies something to gather around, a shared sense that their fates were bound together, from the far north to the far south. And so, in the spring that followed, out in the quiet villages beyond Boston, the long disagreement finally passed from words into something more. Soldiers sent to gather up colonial weapons found instead ordinary farmers standing in the early light. And there, softly at first, and then unmistakably, the first shots of a revolution were exchanged. It had all traced back, in the end, to that cold December night when a small band of determined people had chosen principle over profit and let a harbour full of tea drift out upon the tide. There is something worth holding gently as you rest. That great change does not always arrive with trumpets and banners and noise. Sometimes it begins quietly, with a handful of people standing together in the cold dark, choosing calm resolve over fear. But that is a story whose long road stretches far beyond tonight, and we can leave those farmers standing in the morning mist and let the whole of it settle softly into the past, and travel now somewhere else entirely, somewhere older and more peaceful still. For we drift now much further back, thousands of years, and far to the south, to the dry coastal valleys of what we now call Peru, and to a city whose name is Caral. It rose almost 5,000 years ago, in an age before the great pyramids of Egypt, before the cities of Mesopotamia hummed with life, before the standing stones of distant lands were raised against the sky. And then, gently, it slipped away into forgetting, swallowed by the sand, lost so completely that for the longest time the world did not know it had ever been there at all. Picture the valley where it stood, a wide and quiet stretch of dry earth and stone, with a single slender river winding through it like a thread of silver. To many eyes it would have seemed a hard and unlikely place for a great city to bloom, and yet the people who came to live there did not see a wasteland to be feared. They saw, instead, a place that could be gently shaped. They saw in that modest river the quiet promise of life, and with patience and care and the simple strength of many hands working together, they slowly turned that dry valley into something remarkable. Their first quiet triumph was the growing of food. They learned the rhythms of the river's seasonal rise and fall, and they guided its waters softly out across the valley floor through simple channels, coaxing green shoots up out of the pale earth. Cotton and beans and squash, sweet potatoes and guava, and the cotton most of all became a kind of treasure to them, spun into fine nets and cloth, carried out to the fishing villages along the coast, and traded there for dried fish and other goods, weaving a gentle web of connection between their desert home and the wide shore of the sea. They did not struggle against the land so much as move with it, learning its ways, watching the turning of the seasons and the slow wheel of the stars, and building a life in balance with it all. And out of that patient life rose their great pyramids, broad and quiet mounds of stone and earth raised up from the valley floor. The largest of them stretched long across the ground and lifted high into the desert air. Built without metal tools, without the wheel, without any beast to carry the load, only basket woven from the reeds along the river, filled with stone, carried by hand, and laid down layer upon careful layer. And these were not tombs, not dark places of burial, but open places of gathering, crowned with broad staircases and quiet platforms where fires once glowed beneath the endless southern sky. At their feet spread wide sunken plazas, great round courts where the people came together in their hundreds and their thousands to mark the turning of the seasons and share in the life of the city. For this was, as far as we can tell, a gentle and peaceful place. Among all the ruins of Cairo, no weapons have been found buried in the sand, no great walls raised for defense, no signs of war or violent ending. Here was a people who seemed to have poured their strength not into armies or fortresses, but into building and music and the quiet study of the sky, gathering rather than conquering, trading rather than warring, binding themselves and their neighbors together in a wide and peaceful net of exchange. It is a soft and hopeful thing to rest your mind upon, a whole civilization that chose, across the long centuries, connection over conquest and creation over ruin. And it was, above all, a place alive with sound. Deep in the sands, the diggers of a later age found flutes carved from the hollow bones of great birds, small whistles and drums, instruments made with real care and tuned to carry their notes across the open plazas. So let yourself imagine it, softly, as you lie there in the quiet, the low, steady thrum of drums rising at dusk, the high, gentle keening of the flutes like the desert wind made into music, the warm crackle of fires along the platforms, and all the people of the city gathered together in the fading light beneath a slow, wheeling field of stars. No harsh gods, no cruelty, only reverence and gathering and the simple, ancient beauty of people sharing a night together. For many long centuries, the city flourished in this quiet way. And then, gently, almost without a trace, it began to fade. There was no fire, no conquest, no sudden ruin, only a slow drifting away. Perhaps the rains failed for too long and the fields grew thin, or the old paths of trade shifted elsewhere, or the world around it simply changed, the way all worlds do in time. And so, family by family, they seemed to have drifted off in search of other valleys and other rivers, until the plazas fell silent, and the flutes lay still beneath the drifting sand, and the desert quietly gathered the city back into itself. For nearly 4,000 years it slept there, hidden and waiting, a soft whisper beneath the dunes, remembered by no one, until, at last, in a much later age, patient hands began to brush the sand away, and the old stones came back into the light, stair by stair and wall by wall, and the world learned with wonder that here, in this dry and quiet valley, one of the very oldest cities of all had lived and dreamed and passed away in peace. Today it rests once more beneath the open sky, its plazas touched again by the same winds that once carried the sound of its flutes and the laughter of its children. And it stands now as a gentle reminder that the roots of our human story reach far deeper and far more peacefully than we once believed. And that is where we will let it all come to rest tonight. All these far-off lives, the peasants keeping their small fires through the long winters, the queen in her candlelit hall, the townsfolk gathered in the harbour cold, the builders of a quiet city in the sand, all of them so very long ago now, softened and gentled by the vast reach of time, asking nothing of you at all. They lived, and they endured, and they dreamed, and they passed quietly on, and their stories have carried you, softly, all the way to here. So there is nothing left to do now but rest, no more to listen for, no more to follow. Let the last of these images blur and drift and fade like distant music, and let your body grow heavy and warm and wonderfully still. Let your breathing settle into its own slow, easy rhythm, each breath softer than the last. You are safe, and you are warm, and the whole quiet weight of the night is holding you gently now. Let it carry you the rest of the way down, into deep and peaceful sleep. Rest well, sleep long, and I will be here, quiet in the dark, for as long as you need.